Today is the last installment of our sermon series, The Gospel According to Luke, and it's also the last Sunday before the season of Lent, and it's also Transfiguration Sunday. So this is the day that the church, the historic church, traditions and rhythms commemorates when Jesus and his followers had an incredible mountaintop moment. And we're going to be reading about that in just a little while. An incredible story of a mountaintop moment that's full of imagery, amazingness, and glory. And then we have to go back down the mountain to the valley, right? So that's kind of how that works, isn't it? And this is kind of an interesting topic for a lot of us because I believe that there's some universality to it, right? That we all have these kinds of experiences, that we love, sort of that mountaintop experience, and so we chase it. And sometimes, right, we chase it our whole lives, just wanting to feel that feeling again. But the problem is that the mountaintop moments don't usually last, right? You have to come down the mountain at some point. And so I was thinking about this. I was thinking about, what is the most sort of challenging mountaintop kind of experience that you could have? And so, of course, what would you think that I would come up with? Mount Everest, right? What was it you said? Falling in love. You'll have to forgive me for being a little, okay. Oh yeah, that's right. It does crash off there, right? There's a crevice that you fall into and then, no. Some of you are still on those mountaintops, right? But conquering Everest, right? So the idea of climbing Mount Everest, is sort of this mythical thing for most of us, right? Because we will never do it, right? That's just something that most of us don't even really think about doing. But there's something within the human spirit, right? That those things call to people. And so Mount Everest has become kind of this incredible milestone for a lot of people that decide that they want to climb it, that they want to go to the top of the world. I mean, if you think about this, Mount Everest is the world's tallest peak. It's over 29,000 feet above sea level from the base all the way to the top. So when I was a kid, when I was 13 years old, I climbed Pikes Peak from the base all the way to the summit. Now, Pikes Peak is what they call a 14er in Colorado, 14,000 feet plus, right? If I tried to do that now, I would die. That would be bad. But I was 13 and I'd lived all the way up until that point in Colorado. I was used to the altitude, and so I was able to do it. And but to think about that being Everest is twice the size of Pikes Peak. And so to climb it is just unbelievable. And a few thousand people try it every year. You could see the majesty of it right there. I mean, it's unbelievable. It can be accessed by two different countries, so Nepal and Tibet. And it's become kind of a tourist industry, right? So people will go, and you don't have to climb all the way to the summit, but, so to experience it, right, they'll do that for you. But in order to climb to the summit, and you can kind of see the way that it looks here. There was a photo, the next photo shows some of the climbers. So it's really crowded to climb it, honestly. But since the 1950s, 350 people have died doing this. 200 of them are still on the mountain. And for a lot of climbers, depending on the time of year, as they're climbing, they can see some of the bodies that are still there. There was one that was there for years until it was finally recovered, or it it slid away or something, but they just called the body green boots. They didn't know who the person was. And that was just like one of the things that you talked about, right? We went past green boots, and then everyone knew that you were talking about a person who had died climbing it. If you want to climb it and you want to get to the summit, I mean, obviously you have to train for it, but in order to get there safely, it's going to cost you about $100,000 to make it happen with a real guide, with good equipment and a real plan. But you can, go cut rates and hire some company from Nepal that'll do it for less than $30,000. Not sure I would do that if I was gonna climb, but the thing is that there's all these sacrifices that people make in order to get to that summit. And then what do you expect happens once you get to the summit? What's the next thing that happens once you've arrived at the summit of Mount Everest? You got to go back down, right? You have to go back down into the valley. I mean, you might get your photos, right? You might have this unbelievable life experience, but I mean, that's what happens with every mountaintop moment. You might feel as though you've accomplished, this is it, right? Or I've had this experience, what Rob told us about in the story of his friends. You have this mystical epiphany, spiritual awakening, this moment. Maybe you were at a conference, maybe you were in a worship service, or maybe you read something, or you had a near-death experience that awakened you, or something happened where all of a sudden you felt like that you were at the summit, right? That you had achieved this mountaintop moment. But the problem is you can never stay there, right? And the other thing about it that nobody really tells you when you have mountaintop moments is that when you return from your mountaintop moment, you might have had this incredible, epiphany, this unbelievable awakening, all this stuff, but all the people that you go back to were just getting up and going to work, right? You ever have that happen? You come back. I mean, I went on a silent retreat at a monastery that was overlooking the Pacific Ocean near Big Sur. Come on. I mean, it was amazing. Going to worship service, prayers, reading, reflecting. I mean, just the unbelievable creation that I was experiencing. And then you go back home and, there's bills to be paid. The kids are, being a pain. I mean, it's just so that's one of those things that it really can cause you to be hollowed out, right? After you've had this mountaintop moment, you go back down and all of a sudden it's ugh. So we live for these mountaintop moments and we endure the valleys, right? We chase them. But what if we were able to kind of reframe this just a bit, right? What if we were able to reframe this whole thing of I want to get to the mountaintop because I want to feel, I want to be alive. What if the mountaintop was just part of the journey and it wasn't the destination? That the valley was part of the journey too. And so here's what I kind of uncovered as I was thinking about this over this past week. And it's the big idea that we're going to carry with us throughout this sermon as we kind of journey through the Gospel of Luke and the story of Jesus' transfiguration. We love the mountaintops. We learn in the valley. We love the mountaintops. We learn in the valley. So let's take a look. We're going to be in Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 43a. It's kind of a long passage, so I'm going to kind of teach as I go. And so let's jump in. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, okay, so what Jesus was saying before this, it's where he told his disciples, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'm going to be captured, I'm going to be beaten, and I'm going to be killed. So that's good news. And then he says to them, So basically, if you want to follow me, then you need to take up your cross. You need to lose your life in order to find it. I mean, he gives them all of this like unbelievably hard stuff to sort of absorb. And so after he says all this stuff, and in one gospel account, Peter actually pulls Jesus aside after he does that and says, hey, would you mind not talking about that anymore? We've got something going around here, you know? Like, we're trying to grow this thing, and you talking about getting killed isn't really good for business. Had a marketing plan put together, didn't involve that. So at any rate, and Jesus says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," which had to sting just a tad. But what we know about that is that Jesus wasn't talking to Peter, right? The temptation was still there. The temptation that he experienced when he spent 40 days and 40 nights. It's like the Satan, the accuser, keeps popping up going, hey, you don't have to do this really, right? So Peter was just giving voice to that accusing kind of declaration. Anyway, so Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. So Jesus goes to a mountain with a few disciples to pray. We don't know exactly which mountain. It could have been a number of them. Mount Hermon is like one of the ones that is sometimes put forward. Mount Hermon is the tallest mountain in Israel. It also borders Syria and Lebanon. So there's like parts of it that are in all three of those countries. And it gets snow, and people go skiing on it, which is kind of interesting to think about, in the Middle East, but there you go. So Mount Hermon is a tall mountain. It probably wasn't that, but it could have been another mountain that's like kind of in Israel's history, Mount Tabor, which is where, that's like close to where Gideon fought his battle against the Midianites, where Deborah, the great judge that led Israel, the female judge, there was a battle there too as well. So there's lots of places it could have been, but at any rate, it goes up, right, onto a mountain to pray, and probably to talk about what Jesus had just told them. So then stuff happens. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became as bright as a flash of lightning. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking about his exodus, which he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. Now, Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but as they awoke, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. So the disciples are sleepy. And there was another time when they were sleepy too, right? In Gethsemane, right? When Jesus goes again to pray, come with me to pray, and then the disciples fall asleep. So it speaks to their inability to really see, their inability to be awake to the reality of what is really transpiring in front of them. And what is transpiring in front of them? Well, Moses and Elijah appear in front of, and appear with Jesus, and they're having a conversation. And we don't know why or how they believe them to be Moses and Elijah. But they do, right? That's the experience. And, this is not lost on us, right? That Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets. And so Jesus is sort of standing in between the law and the prophets, right? And basically there's something new, right? There's a fulfillment of that. Like all of those things are pointing to Jesus. And there's this glorious sort of thing that occurs. And so as Peter is experiencing all of this stuff, he can't help but say something. And so here's what happens. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here." Who wouldn't want to be on the mountaintop where there's light shining and Moses, Elijah, and Jesus are all hanging out, having a conversation. It is good for us to be here. Let us set up 3 tents. Or tabernacles, right? One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And then I love the little commentary, not realizing what he was saying. That's the story of my life right there. That's why I like Peter so much. My youngest son asked me, like, why do you, he goes, we were FaceTiming and he was asking me all these questions about the Bible, which was unusual and kind of awesome. And so he said, which one is your favorite apostle? And I said, well, it's Peter because he always did dumb stuff. And yet, God saw fit to use him, right? And to keep giving him chances. And so anyway, but yeah, so Peter didn't know what he was saying. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand what was going on. But what do you think Peter was trying to do? See, Peter wants to stay there and create a destination. He's like, this is now a holy site. Let's create a thing that people can come to and we'll take up an offering. Or we'll have a movement, or we'll have like this. This is great. Let's just stay here. I mean, do you blame him? I mean, he experienced something incredible. And he's like, maybe this is why Jesus is here. Maybe this is the thing, right? That he's revealed in glory, and we have this continuity. We have this amazing, thing that happened to us, and we can build a tabernacle for each one of them, and people can come here and worship. It'll be amazing. We'll make brochures. The marketing plan is coming true, right? So here's what happens. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. Okay, so they have this experience. The voice of God says, listen to him. Do what he wants you to do. Follow him. That's what you got to do, right? You can't stay here. This is not part of the plan, that you create a destination, right? So then they go back down the mountain. And so the valley brings all of it back into focus. There's real work, real transformation. So how do we know that? Well, there's an amazing story that kind of connects to this. And so as they come back down the mountain, let's keep reading. On the next day, when they had come down from the mountain, a great crowd met him. And just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seizes him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and put up with you?" Bring your son here. So, lest you think that Jesus isn't affected by the mountaintop to the valley, I mean, he looks around at his disciples and is like, are you freaking kidding me? How long do I got to put up with these people? Right? I mean, he's probably feeling pretty good coming down from the mountain. Glory of God, Moses and Elijah. He's like, hey guys, how's it going? Long time no see, right? The voice of God says, listen to him. And then he comes down the mountain and it's like problems, people complaining. His disciples can't do the things that he's called them to do. There's a lot of things that you could say about this. I mean, I could dissect the passage. I could go into the whole thing about evil spirits and how people saw those kinds of things and how this could have been something else. He's having seizures. He has epilepsy. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could do to take apart the text. But in the end, it comes down to Jesus and his disciples having this mountaintop moment and then coming back down to the reality where people are in need, where people can't do what they're supposed to do, where they're frustrating, where the people that weren't with you when you were on the mountain are still kind of muddling around and making life miserable for you. I mean, all of those kinds of things. But see, Jesus, in the end, just says, bring your son here. While he was being brought forward, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions, but Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. So, my question is, after all of this, right, after this whole story of even Jesus and his disciples having this incredible moment and then, having to return to the valley where the real work is done, where the real transformation is done, where the real learning happens, where all of the ways that the world can be made right are done in the valley and not on the mountaintop. We have this story. So what does this say about the current state of Christianity in our culture right now? It's all about the mountaintop. I mean, it's just a whole bunch of people chasing the mountaintop, right? About winning, about being on the winning team, about power, about triumphalism, about being bigger and better and glitzier and whatever, right? When a church is only focused on growing the numbers of the people in the church, it's lost the plot. Or when a church is not really caring about what's going on in the valley and only wants to be on the mountaintop, it's lost the plot. And so Christianity in America has become obsessed with power and money and winning. And none of those things were part of what Jesus had said to his disciples. Because right before all of this, he said to them, as I reminded you, if you want to save your life, you need to lose it. You need to take up your cross and follow me. In other places he would say, the first, in God's kingdom, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It was a race to the bottom, in a certain sense, with Jesus. And those mountaintop moments, right? If we just want to get through the valleys and back to the summit, even though the actual work, the real transformation happens in the valleys and not on the mountaintop, we just want to rush through that. We just want to push through that stuff because that doesn't feel real to us anymore because we've been so used to feeling alive, right? In the mountaintop moments of celebration and worship and all the rest of it, right? And that's not what this is about. It's not, we want to have a great time on Sunday, but this isn't entertainment. You all are not consumers, although that's what Christian culture right now would show you, right? That's what they want you to be. Christian culture right now just wants consumers, people who show up, who do a few things here and there to make sure that the whole thing keeps floating. And then they can stay on the mountaintop. They can high-five each other and have the flashing lights and the smoke and the mirrors and all the rest of it. If that seems harsh for me to be saying, I'm sorry, but it's the truth. So what is it we learn when we actually listen to Jesus, right? When we follow that command from God, say, listen to him. Don't listen to all the other voices that say you need to stay on the mountaintop. Don't listen to poor old Peter who didn't know what he was saying and saying it's good for us to be here. Let's build something so that everybody will come to us. So what do we learn? The mountaintop offers a vision of how to return to the valley. Because Jesus, and what was the vision, right? The vision that they had was that Jesus was glorified. It's like the veil was parted and they could see the glory of the Christ, the second person of the Trinity, who was in the beginning and who would always be, who the Gospel of John said, in the beginning was the Logos, the Word, the blueprint, the Christ. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through the Word. Not anything that has been made has not been made except through the Word, except through the Christ, right? And you can imagine that in a weird way. You can be like, that the voice, the creative, expressive voice of God is the Logos, the Word, the blueprint, the Christ. And what did God say to those guys on the mountaintop? Listen to him. And that's the vision, right? Is that if we listen to Jesus, then we know how to go from the mountaintop to the valley and to be in the valley, right? To be doing the work of Christ, to be his hands and feet. It's like Jesus showed up and had to show up in the valley because the disciples weren't doing their job. And so that's the vision that we have, is that, we know what we need to do in order to be in the valley. We need to listen to him. And the second thing that we need to understand is the hard work of healing doesn't happen on the mountain. It might feel great. It might feel amazing. The thing that you've been chasing, whatever it is that you do to chase the mountaintop, right? And I've known people that's what they do. They just chase the mountaintop moments all the time. I just got to feel better. I just got to feel something. I just got to feel alive. And whatever that means for you, whether, it's experiences, spiritual sort of events, or if it's addiction or other things, right? We chase it. But that hard work of healing is not going to happen in that moment. The hard work happens when you're in the valley and you look around you and it doesn't always seem bright and shiny and amazing. That's where the hard work of healing can take place. I love the one version of that story. The man that brings his son, he says, please heal my son. And Jesus is like, well, do you believe? And he goes, I believe, help my unbelief, which is a way of him saying, I got this much faith right now, about the size of a mustard seed. And Jesus is like, cool, I can work with that. And so that hard work is going to take place in the valley moments, right? And the last thing that we can see here in this story through Peter's faux pas is that the church isn't a destination, it's a starting point. And if you're thinking about it as a destination, I go to church, right? I'm going to go to church, I'm going to receive stuff, and then I'm going to leave. And then that's it. Then you're just missing the plot, right? Because this isn't a destination. This is a starting point. It's a launching pad. It's not a country club. It's a hospital. I mean, this is where people come and they can be healed, right? Alongside others, but not healed so that they can stay, or not experience, like amazing things, so they can stay here and make this the place that they want to dwell, so that they can carry all of what they've experienced back out into the world around us, right? The church isn't a destination. You are the church. Every single one of us is the church. We carry it with us wherever we go. It was never meant to be a thing that only happened here. And so I want to close with a prayer before we do let me do my last point. Our big idea, right? We come back to it because we love the mountaintops, but we learn in the valley. And I found this great prayer that I want to share. And we can make this my closing prayer for those who are needing to come back up to the stage. So let's pray. Let's just join our hearts together and let me read this because it speaks right into what we just learned. Oh God, we open our eyes and we see Jesus. The months of ministry transfigured to a beam of light, the light of the world, your light. May your light shine upon us. We open our eyes and we see Moses and Elijah, your word restoring us, showing us the way, telling us story, your story, his story, our story. May your words speak to us. We open our eyes and we see mist, the cloud of your presence, which assures us of all we do not know, and that we do not need to fear that. Teach us to trust. We open our eyes and we see Peter's constructions, his best plans, our missing the point, our missing the way. Forgive our foolishness and sin. We open our eyes and we see Jesus not casting us off, but leading us down, leading us out to ministry, to people. Your love endures forever. We open our ears and we hear your voice. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. And we give you thanks. Amen.